Chess YouTube, what is happening? In today's video, we're looking at one of the most insane games ever played between Gukesh D, the reigning world champion, and Magnus Carlsen, the greatest player of all time. Now, the game begins very typical e4, c5, standard stuff, but then on move 15, Gukesh lights the board on fire with the move f3, trapping Black's knight, but Black does the same, g5, trapping White's knight on h4. The board was simply lit on fire, and the game from there is absolutely insane. Alright, in the game, Gukesh playing as White opens 1e4, Black 1c5, then knight f3, knight c6, and now here on move 3, bishop b5, a very standard idea. And in case you don't know, this right here is called the Rossolimo variation, and it's a very typical opening. White's idea is very simple. He's putting immediate pressure on that knight on c6, he's setting up castling on the king side, and from there, he may take on c6 or go c3 and d4, getting a massive pawn center in the middle of the board. Now, how is Black going to respond? Magnus here, he plays literally everything here as Black on move 3. He plays e6, e5, g6, knight f6, even Prognanda's new opening, h5, is on the cards when Magnus is playing. Now, in the game, he plays his old favorite move here. That is the move g6, trying to fianchetto his bishop on g7, a very typical idea for Black in many different openings. Now here, Gukesh, the two main options are taking on c6, a very provocative idea, and castling, intending c3 and d4. And in the game, he does choose the latter option. Short castles is the move. Now Black, bishop g7, and once again, White's got many ideas, taking on c6, rook e1, c3, and so on. In the game, c3 is the move, intending a fast d4, one of the absolute main lines here for White. Now Magnus, knight f6, pressuring e4, rook e1, defends the pawn, and then castles. And now here, this is where the big confrontation of the opening begins. Gukesh here, he finally plays the key idea, d4. Literally everything in the opening so far was leading up to this very move. Castling, rook e1, defending e4, then c3 and d4, seizing the center, and of course, the bishop on b5, putting pressure on this knight, which does pressure d4. Literally everything in the White camp is geared up for this very moment. Now, how is Black going to respond? Black here has a wide variety of ways to respond. For example, d5 is good, breaking in the center, queen to b6 is good, a6 is good, even moves like taking on d4 are also playable. Now, in the game, Magnus here, he decides to play the absolute main line as Black, which leads to a very interesting pawn structure. He plays the move d5, breaking in the center. Now, why is this move so interesting? Well, White here has a couple of main responses. First of all, you can take on d5. That is not the most ambitious option. If you do that, for example, e takes and then queen takes, and Black is doing relatively fine. Now, instead, Gukesh in the game, this guy is a very principled player. He does not back down from a challenge. Oh no, in this position, he plays the very strong move e5, gaining space in the center, and now, look at this. We sort of have this modified French defense pawn structure. More on that in just one moment. But first, that knight on f6, it's under attack. It's got to go somewhere. The big question is, where do you want to go as Black right here? Well, in the game, he plays by far the strongest move, but a very committal idea. That is the move, knight to e4, jumping into the center of the board with that knight. It turns out there really isn't anything else. e8 and d7 are way too passive, and g4 and h5 are way too vulnerable. Therefore, e4 is really the only idea here in the position. So, knight e4 played in the game, and now Gukesh plays a very simple idea, bishop e3, pressuring c5, and threatening to win that pawn on c5 in one go. Magnus, he takes on d4, c takes, and here let's slow down and talk strategy. What are the ideas for both sides, for White and for Black, right here in this position? Well, it turns out White here has sort of a modified French defense pawn structure. His pawn on e5 gives him a little more space on the king side. However, unlike the French defense, the bishop on c8 is not hemmed in by the pawn on e6. The bishop here on c8 has easy access to f5 and g4, and that completely changes the entire position. In the French, typically White is the one attacking on the king side and Black on the queen side. However, here, in this position, White is basically trying to attack on the queen side with moves like a4 and b4, rook c1, and so on, whereas Black, believe it or not, will be the one attacking on the king side. All right, it's Black to move. How does Magnus want to increase the pressure on the white position? He's got many ideas here. Bishop d7 is one idea, a6, f6, and so on, but instead he plays probably the main line here, the classical idea, queen b6, pressuring both b5 and d4, the weak bishop and the weak pawn on d4, and how will Gukesh D respond right here? It turns out he also has many options here as white, but the main options are taking on c6 or defending b5 with, say, the pawn or the queen. In the game, Gukesh, he simply knocks off that knight on c6, bishop takes is the move, and black takes back with the queen here, queen takes. Also, b takes very playable, but instead, the queen takes the bishop in the game. Now, so far, Gukesh has played a fantastic game, getting a really solid game as white. But here, he's got to find the right plan in the middle game. How do you want to proceed? How do you want to increase the pressure on the black position? Well, he plays a very natural idea, knight bd2, pressuring e4, pressuring that knight. But this turns out to be a little bit of a mistake, and Magnus may begin to slowly take over in this game. What is the problem here? It turns out instead, the knight on f3 actually belongs on d2 like this. That would be the right idea. Also, knight g5, also very playable, pressuring this knight with the f knight, not the b knight. Instead, knight bd2 played in the game, pressuring e4, but now Magnus, bishop f5. He simply defends the knight, saying it's going nowhere. If you capture on e4, he takes back on e4 with the bishop, and black again is doing outstanding. Now Gukesh here, he's got his ideas. The reason he played knight bd2 was not to capture on e4, or at least apparently not. Instead, he plays the move knight to b3, sliding out with the knight to the b3 square, maybe eyeing c5. Is that the idea? Either way, Magnus here, he's having absolutely none of it, and he plays a very simple defensive idea, that being b6, which guards a5 and c5, essentially locking down on this knight on b3. The knight now looks incredibly silly, is doing absolutely nothing in the white camp. And Gukesh, what was the idea behind this after all? It's literally a wasted piece right now in the white camp. All right, here, Gukesh. He decides it is time to initiate massive complications. He's done waiting around, and he plays the move knight to h4. Now, this move may look innocent, simply pressuring the bishop on f5, but there's a deeper idea behind that. Gukesh here, he's trying to trap the knight on e4 with the move f3 on the very next move. Magnus, he sees this, he knows this, he does not panic, he stays cool, calm, and collected, and he simply slides back with the bishop to e6. Bishop e6 chosen in the game. And now Gukesh, he uncorks his big idea in this game, f3, attacking the knight, and look at this, the knight is completely trapped. d6, f6, g5, g3, f2, d2, c3, and c5 are all covered by the white pieces. Magnus, what do you do right here? What is your idea? Well, it turns out when you go f3 with the pawn, the knight on h4 also runs out of squares. And Magnus, the move here, the only move, the strongest one, and it is good enough, he plays the move g5. What an idea. Both knights here completely trapped, completely hanging, and here Gukesh, he simply captures on the e4 square, f takes e4, and Magnus on h4. G takes h4 is the move, and now look at this, a completely insane position. Black here, of course, has those two bishops on e6 and g7. Those bishops are a very powerful asset. However, his king side is completely blown open, and Gukesh might be able to attack the black king on g8 sooner or later. All right, now, Gukesh, it's his turn to move. How do you want to proceed? Well, there were a lot of options. For example, rook c1, targeting queen c6 is very playable. Beyond that, taking on d5, also playable, but the drawback of that, if you capture on d5, black takes back with the bishop with a tremendous amount of pressure on g2, and Gukesh would have a very hard time defending. Instead here, the move for Gukesh, bishop to g5, simply pressuring e7 and h4, a very logical idea. But Magnus here, he is ready, and he plays the very precise counterattack, f6, attacking the bishop, driving it back, but also pressuring e5 in the process. Gukesh, what can you do? Basically, the only idea is taking on h4, but then black can take on e5 with a terrific game in the center. All right, Gukesh, he plays the intermediate idea. Rook c1, targets the queen, a strong move sooner or later that was going to be played. Now black, queen to b7 is the move, sliding back and maintaining all the tension on this long diagonal that is so important. That way, if white ever takes on d5, black takes back with the bishop, and black has so much pressure on this long diagonal. Now, Gukesh, he does take on h4. Bada boom, bada bang, bishop takes h4 is the move, and now Magnus. D takes e4 is the move, capturing on e4, and of course the pawn is very well supported by the queen. And now look at this. The one big problem Gukesh has in this game is black has such good control of the light squares. d5, f5, e4, and so on are all covered by the black pieces, and white here has no easy way to advance d5. If he could get d5 in on the board, he would be doing outstanding. But as it is right now, there's no easy way to control d5 further and push d5 with the pawn. Now, Gukesh, what do you want to do here as white? It turns out it's actually very, very hard to find a good plan for white. For example, if queen d2, black simply goes rook a d8 with so much pressure on the d file. Instead, queen to e2 also looks normal. However, black can simply go here, bishop d5, defending e4. And finally, if, for example, bishop g3, black can simply go queen d5, centralizing with a fantastic game. Now, in the game, Gukesh, being a very aggressive player himself, he plays the move rook to c3. The rook lift on the third rank, maybe intending queen c2, rook c1, or maybe intending rook to g3, sliding over on the third rank and starting the attack against the black king. Magnus here, he sees this, and he has the opportunity to win the free pawn on e5. For example, f takes, d takes, bishop takes is the idea, but instead, Magnus here, on move 20, he lights the board on fire with not the strongest move, oh no, but certainly the most entertaining one and the most aggressive one. He plays the move here, f5. And would you have a look at this pawn structure? The black pawns in front of the white pawns in front of the black pawns. Neither side can slow down the other pawn chain, and both sides will be attacking all out with, for example, f4, d5, and so on. There are no breaks on this train. Both sides are all in. They must attack all out from here on out. Now, Gukesh, bishop g5 is the move, trying to defend f4, but Gukesh, he forgot the rook on f8 controls f4 indirectly. Magnus Carlsen, f4 is the move, launching the pawns down the board, and look at this. The e-pawn, supported by the queen, the f-pawn, supported by the rook. Magnus Carlsen, every single piece coming alive here with those two pawns spearheading the attack against the black king. Magnus here is simply cooking. Chef Magnus is serving up a dish, and his name is Gukesh. All right, now, Gukesh, how do you respond? The right move right here is simply rook to f1, defending with the rook on the f file. Instead, queen to c2. This guy is not slowing down. He's all in. He immediately attacks e4 with the queen and also c7 with the rook, but is it too little too late? Magnus here, he finds a series of incredibly precise moves. He begins h6, putting pressure on the bishop, and it turns out going to h4 is literally the only move here. So, bishop h4 chosen in the game by Gukesh, the world champion. But now Magnus, he sees everything. He's got it all mapped out, and he plays the move e3, advancing the pawn. The pawns continue their march down the board, creating insane threats on g2 in the very near future. Now, the one problem with this move, this diagonal right here does open up, and Gukesh, he comes flying in with the queen. Queen g6, pressuring g7, and now Gukesh, has he found a way to turn the tides on the goat and begin to attack the black king? It turns out, no, he has not yet. Now, on g6, the queen, it pressures the bishop on e6, and black does defend. Queen d7 defends the bishop and keeps the attack going. Now here, Gukesh, once again, you must find the right idea, and the right idea right here is simply rook to f1, sliding over with the rook, pressuring f4, and defending along the f file. Instead, he finds the completely opposite idea. Rook e to c1 is the move, threatening rook c7, but it turns out it is not justified right here. He had to defend. This is simply too aggressive. Magnus Carlsen, he proceeds, taking on b3. Bishop takes b3, a very precise move. What is the idea? The knight on b3, the one thing it did all game was defend d4, and now it's even failing in that really pathetic role. Magnus here, Or should I say, Chef Carlsen, he is simply cooking. He takes on b3. White takes back, and then the queen flies in and takes on d4. Queen takes d4 is the move. Magnus, the GOAT, picking up yet another pawn in this game. All right, White, rook c7. He finally flies in, but Gukesh, don't you know, there is no more queen on d7. That was the entire idea of rook c7 in the first place. Okay, it's not just that. Of course, he is pressuring e7 right here with the bishop and the rook, but of course, Magnus, he is not slowing down. Oh no, rook a to e8, slides over with the rook, defends e7, and now he's all ready to push these pawns even further down the board. All right, Gukesh, the world champion, how do you want to defend? There are plenty of ideas, but they all look rather mediocre. For example, queen to g4 is playable, queen c6, also bishop to e1 for reasons that are simply beyond me, and Gukesh plays that move in the game. Bishop to e1. Seriously, why on earth would you go back with the bishop to the e1 square? This makes no sense to me. If you think you know why, comment down below in the comments. Why did Gukesh play this move right here? Even with Stockfish in front of me, I cannot find the idea. All right, Magnus here. He takes on e5. Queen takes e5, winning the pawn. And now, rook takes a7. Gukesh, the only thing he can do here is try to win those queenside pawns and hang on for dear life. But Magnus, of course, this guy is not slowing down. He plays the move queen to f5, offering the queen trade. And of course, if White trades queens, Black here is simply winning in the endgame. His pieces are simply too active, too dominant. The bishop on g7 slicing down the board. The endgame is just unplayable. Therefore here, he plays the move. Queen takes b6, equalizing material. However, Magnus, look at all of his pieces. The queen on f5, the bishop on g7, the rooks slicing down the board, and of course, the pawns on e3 and f4. Everything in the black camp is just staring down at the white king. And here Magnus, he plays the final move to launch the final fatal attack against the white king. Of course, he plays the move f3, lighting the board on fire with the two very aggressive pawns. Of course, this move right here, it gives up the pawn on e3 if White wants it. What would happen if White takes on e3? What is the idea? Well, it's very, very simple. Queen to g4 threatens mate, threatens f2 check. The threats are overwhelming, besides bishop d4 as well, pinning the queen on d3 to the king on the g1 square. That would be absolutely devastating. Therefore, taking on e3 is simply not an option. It is completely out of the question. But without that, what can you do here as White? In the game, Gukesh, he takes on f3. G takes, but now Magnus, queen takes f3, the queen flies in, threatening checkmate on f1 in one move. The audacity. All right, Gukesh, this guy is a fighter until the very, very end. He plays the move queen e6, hitting the king, king to h7, and now h3, doing the only thing he can, giving his king a little more room on h2 to make queen to f1 with king to h2, and that is what happens. Magnus here, he's not slowing down. He sees mate, and he goes in for the kill. Queen to f1, king to h2 is forced, queen to e2, now king to g3, and finally, rook f3 hits the king, king to h4, and finally, bishop to f6. And in this position, Gukesh D, he simply resigns on the spot, and here's why. If, for example, king to h5, the winning idea, rook to h3 would be checkmate. And beyond that, if, say, king to, say, I don't know, g4 right here, moves like rook to g8 are just devastating, and therefore, for that reason, Gukesh D, the reigning world champion and maybe the future GOAT, he resigns to the current GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. Wow, what a game between Magnus and Gukesh D in the 2023 Super United Croatia Rapid Tournament. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please show me some love. Smash that like button, comment down below what you thought of the game. And by the way, if you want to learn directly from me, a 2000 ELO online player, about how to get better at online chess, I can absolutely help you. All you got to do, go to drmikechess.com. It's my free online coaching program, also linked down below in the pinned comment and the description. When you go there, it's free to join. I have free group coaching, free courses, free community, literally everything you need to get better at online chess. And my students there are making insane results. We're talking 100 to 200 to 400 plus ELO in a single month. If you want results like that, trust me, I can absolutely help you out. Go to drmikechess.com. Again, it's free to join. I'll see you there, and as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.